In Ouadane, we visited a place that called itself a museum. But it wasn't a museum in the way most of us think of museums. There were no display cases, no labels, no climate-controlled rooms, no carefully arranged exhibits. Instead, there were roofless buildings, collapsed walls, sunlit courtyards, and piles upon piles of objects gathered over decades. At first glance, it looked like chaos, and that was exactly what made it so fascinating. Unlike the orderly museum we had visited earlier, this felt less like a collection and more like a lifetime of rescue. Every room seemed filled with fragments that someone had simply refused to let disappear. Our guide and curator welcomed us through an ancient wooden doorway into his family home and into a world where centuries had become tangled together. Ancient grinding stones sat beside modern machinery, fossils lay next to enamel teapots, traditional pottery mingled with rusting tools, bottles, military relics, shell casings, and fragments of daily life whose stories had long since been forgotten. An archaeologist might have been horrified. Everything had been removed from its original context. Dates blurred together. Objects from entirely different eras sat side by side, and yet somehow it worked. Because this place wasn't trying to tell history in a neat chronological sequence, it was telling a different story, a human story, a story about memory. As we wandered through the ruins, I realized that the collection and the building had become inseparable. The museum itself was slowly collapsing around the objects it was protecting. Roofs had fallen away. Sunlight streamed into spaces that had once been homes. The stones of Ouadane were preserving the artifacts of Ouadane. The building had become part of the collection. The curator himself didn't feel like a museum director. He felt like a guardian, a man who could not bear to watch pieces of his culture vanish into the desert. Every object seemed to have a story. Every stone, tool, fossil, and fragment had been gathered because it mattered to someone, somewhere, at some point in time. And among all the grinding stones, fossils, pottery, tools, and relics, he showed us something entirely unexpected. Shoe soles, not ordinary soles, but soles carved with images and symbols. His mission, he explained through our guide, was to embed images into the soles of shoes so that people would leave footprints that were more than footprints, small stories pressed into the sand behind them. I loved that idea. Most museums are devoted to preserving footprints from the past. He was creating new ones. And suddenly, the entire place made sense. The scholars of Ouadane left traces through their manuscripts. The caravans left traces across the Sahara. Generations of families left traces in these stone houses, and here was one man continuing the same tradition in his own way, not preserving history behind glass, not organizing the past into perfect categories, simply gathering fragments before they disappeared and ensuring that something remained. As we left, I realized that my favorite museum in Mauritania was not the most polished, the most valuable, or the most scientifically important. It was the most human. A place where history, memory, curiosity, and imagination had all become mixed together beneath the open sky. A place where one man quietly stood against forgetting, and where, among the ruins of an ancient desert city, the past was still leaving footprints.